You may assume this is a pretty normal man, but I'm not so sure anymore. Joseph McRoberts, otherwise known as DJ Def Joey, was quite a prolific YouTuber back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. It's not really relevant to this story, but I will mention it since Joey does. But DJ Def Joey does say that he is profoundly deaf, and that he uses American Sign Language in his videos. This is along with captions that aren't always 100% accurate. He has posted 228 videos, and to date has amassed a total of 24 million views. As well as this, he had a blog that looked like it started and stopped pretty quickly. He's also what looks to be a semi-professional photographer, but none of that really matters. What we're looking at today is just one of his videos in particular. The video appears to have been filmed in 2008, but was released here in 2010. We see Joey standing in his backyard as he starts to tell us a story. He tells us that on Halloween of 1945, his grandmother sadly passed away. This was 8 years before Joey was even born. I will say that he refers to her as both his great-grandmother and also his grandmother, so I'm just going to use grandmother from here on out. He tells us of how in the early 1990s, the cemetery where she was laid to rest suffered from corruption and it eventually closed down. And I, being the kind of guy that I am, have actually looked at this issue before, and it is terrifyingly common in the US. Cemeteries run as private businesses are extremely vulnerable. I've seen multiple videos of people removing their loved ones' caskets from mausoleums, crumbling, leaking buildings that have ceased to be maintained, and to all intents and purposes have simply shut down and been forgotten. So I imagine something like this must have happened here. And this is where things get weird. Instead of finding a new burial site, Joey brought his grandmother's casket home, to his own backyard. And here he says he cares for it, and cares for her. And then, quite perplexingly, Joey offers to show us the contents of the casket. And here is that video. The shaky camera work adds to the eerie vibe, and then the casket is opened. Joey inspects his grandmother's remains which are remarkably intact. Her hair is still laid out ceremonially, and her gown is still white. We can probably thank a mixture of a sealed casket, dry California weather, a dry tomb, and whatever insanely dangerous embalming fluids they were using in the 1940s. However, what happened next was something that shocked me, and that is something that's become increasingly difficult to do. Joey laid the camera down, facing his grandmother's head. He then leans in closely and kisses her, and not just once. Over 10 kisses land on her mouth and nose area before he pulls away and then wipes his mouth. Somehow the wipe just makes this whole thing 10 times worse. It makes it seem like there must have been a residue or bits. Even though Joey has retired from YouTube, that doesn't mean he retired entirely from the internet. He still takes photographs and is semi-active on Twitter, and from what I can deduce, he is now over 70 years old, and you can bet his grandmother is right there with him, and she probably still gets a goodnight kiss. As I headed onto heavenlyangels.org, I was immediately struck by its creepy, outdated design. It feels almost like stepping into a digital time capsule, leading us all the way back to 2006, with simple, old-school fonts and clunky navigation. It transports us back to a time when websites were simpler, and in one way they were less soothing to the eye, but in another way, more beautiful. The homepage is cluttered with numerous links and images in a somewhat chaotic manner. Scrolling through the page, we come across many topics. These range from the spiritual to, well, all kinds of bizarre. There are mentions of being microchipped, warnings about the dangers of government surveillance, and detailed descriptions of encounters with aliens of different kinds. It's an unsettling mix that feels almost overwhelming. The more you read, the more uneasy you feel. The content is filled with conspiracy theories and apocalyptic warnings. There are long, rambling passages about divine revelations and messages from higher beings. But it's not just the topics themselves, it's also the way they're presented, almost with a sense of urgency and paranoia that frankly makes my skin kind of crawl. For example, there's this one section where it talks about the threat of microchips being implanted in humans, which does seem to be a common fear among some conspiracy theorists. The idea here is presented as an inevitable future, a loss of personal freedom that we should all be terrified of. Another part of the site delves into encounters with extraterrestrial beings, and it describes them in great detail, as if they are a routine part of the human experience. The site even offers advice on how to protect yourself from these otherworldly threats. As we scroll further, things are getting weirder and weirder. Many images of angels, aliens, and obscure symbols are scattered throughout the page. Each link you click takes you deeper into the labyrinth. It's a journey that feels more and more disconnected from reality the longer you stay on the site. But maybe what strikes me most is how weirdly nostalgic this all feels. I love that nostalgic feeling, but this familiarity is, for some reason, really unsettling. The design, the language, the overall vibe. It's a reminder of the early days of the internet when websites like this were more common. People with alternative views didn't really used to have social media as an outlet. So they, would have to create websites to share their views or their messages. And it just feels eerie, like looking into the past that was both simpler, but was also less predictable and a little more uneasy. There's an amazing word that almost covers the feeling that this website brings me. And that word is nostalgia. A noun that means a deep nostalgic feeling that causes physical pain. And that seems to be as close as I can find. As I looked further into the website, I was shocked by the amount of content that is actually there. The menu on the left is a maze of links. They lead to a treasure trove of over 5,000 images available for download, and more than 7,000 pages of text. This isn't just a simple collection of ideas, it's an extensive archive that must have taken an enormous amount of time and effort, and possibly even money, to compile. It's extremely hard to believe this could be a hoax, unless it was an incredibly elaborate one. Clicking through various sections, it becomes clear that this site is not just about one person's strange ideas. Instead, it presents itself as a deeply held belief system, almost like a religion or a doomsday cult. I'm sure the texts are written with genuine belief, discussing everything from spiritual enlightenment to dire warnings about the future. There are references to divine messages, angelic beings, and a constant undercurrent of impending doom. I'm going to mention microchipping again purely because it features so much on this website. This section was particularly unsettling. It warns that this technology will lead to a total loss of freedom and personal autonomy. Essentially, once we're microchipped, we will no longer be human. Another part of the website is dedicated to encounters with extraterrestrial beings. It details these experiences with an unsettling level of specificity. The narratives are so detailed and extensive that it feels like you're stepping into an alternate reality. Who knows, perhaps some of this is true. I know I have experienced a few things that I can't explain, so why wouldn't others have the same? But what exactly is this? Is it a genuine religion? Is it a cult? Or is it one of the most elaborate hoaxes I have ever seen? The sheer amount of content suggests that, at the very least, a lot of people are deeply invested in these beliefs, and perhaps the most terrifying part of this exploration is the nagging question: what happens if they are correct? What if the warnings and prophecies laid out on his website are not the product of overactive imaginations, but instead glimpses of a reality that we are not yet aware of? I admit this story does seem a little weird at first, but what comes next is really puzzling. Around 8 months ago, a Reddit user named Nihala posted an image that we can tell really got to him. And honestly, it's made me feel kind of weird too. The post read, "A few years ago when visiting in-laws, I agreed to walk my brother-in-law's dog. The dog was hyperactive, leading me several blocks away to a remote, unfamiliar area with no one around. It was getting dark, and I stumbled across this message about a human trafficker, and right there on the pavement, with the name now scrawled out, it said, 'Name redacted, is a human trafficker. Aaron Brooke James killed Steffi, 2007. Check under the shed.' The name of the alleged human trafficker was painted out for unknown reasons. Maybe the painter regretted it or got scared of the possible consequences, or maybe the owner of the name was tipped off and then decided to save themselves by painting over it. Regardless, Nihala, the original poster of these pictures, explained further in the comments. I told my brother-in-law, who said he would look into it and forward it to the authorities. I never followed up with them since I live 1,000 miles away from there, and I was dealing with a lot of heavy personal stuff at the time, and I got subsequently divorced anyway. I actually forgot about this until today, when I was scrolling through old photos I took. Nihala said the events took place in Seattle, and that they themselves didn't follow up on this with the police, but their brother-in-law said they would. This led other Reddit users to ponder on whether the brother-in-law was perhaps involved a little deeper in this situation, and perhaps them saying they would take it up with the police was their way of killing the trail, allowing this whole thing to be forgotten once again. A user named Leet Clowns kindly offered to help shed some light on the events, saying, "Have you looked for missing or murdered women in your city named Steffi? What's the city or town? I'll do it if you don't want to." The original poster, Nihala, replied, "It was actually in a different city from where I live, thousands of miles away. I went ahead and contacted that local police department with the photos and explanation, along with the exact location of the pics." User Slightly Sinister added their thoughts and prior knowledge of similar graffiti, saying, "There was someone spray painting a bunch of weird accusations all over Seattle a few months ago. saw some post about it on Nextdoor a while back. Person doing it was mentally unstable, was graffitiing accusations outside random people's houses that they were killers, etc. This looks similar to the posts I saw. And there were indeed a string of these graffiti incidents in Seattle. Someone had spray painted bizarre accusations on buildings, homes, and pavements. The person simply tagged random places, accusing the people that lived there. This vandalism caused quite a stir in the community, with many people feeling uneasy and wrongly targeted. The messages seemed to pop up overnight, and they didn't seem to make much sense or have any basis in reality. Imagine for a moment that you wake up one day, and out of nowhere you're accused of being a murderer. That wouldn't just ruin your day. It could destroy your entire life. But many people aren't convinced that this incident is related to the prior incidents, and in fact, some Reddit users believe they have cracked the case. There was indeed someone named Brooke James in the local area. Brooke received a prison sentence on April 3, 2009 when she was 21 years old. The sentence was for 1 year and 1 day. The charges were illicit substance related and were related to the night that a woman named Kyla Helvey overdosed in 2007. Kyla, also 21, had just met Brooke and 24-year-old Mallory Smith. The three of them planned to spend the evening together, relaxing in Mallory's hot tub, drinking and unwinding. They decided to mix a powerful party substance called GHB into their drinks. Kyla, unfamiliar with the substance, was warned by Brooke and Mallory about the risks of mixing it with alcohol. However, despite this alleged warning, Kyla took a swig of the substance directly from the bottle. GHB has a sedative or anesthetic effect on the body, and it is kind of similar to alcohol in that it suppresses the central nervous system, but taken in conjunction with drink, it can push the body too far. So, by the time the morning came, Kyla had taken her final breath. Her time on this earth had come to an end. Police accused Brooke and Mallory of failing to call for help, even though they had noticed that something was wrong, and they even checked Kyla's pulse. And instead of dialing 911, they took pictures of her passed out, thinking she just had a little too much and was now sleeping it off. Mallory, who actually supplied the GHB, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received nearly 2 years in prison, and Brooke did face the same charge. However, her charge was dropped before the trial due to insufficient evidence, and she was charged simply with possession instead. The prosecutor noted Brooke's repeated failures to follow court orders, including maintaining a steady job and avoiding alcohol. She also highlighted Brooke's arrest warrants in California and her disturbing "Die Pretty" tattoo. During the hearing, a tearful Brooke James apologized to Kyla's family, stating she's trying to better her life by giving up substances and alcohol and finding a good job. The judge decided against an alternative sentence for treatment, as she doubted Brooke's commitment to recovery. While it's not certain that this case is directly tied to the message found in Seattle, there are many that think it is, but I digress. This fails to answer the question of who Steffi is, the name of the victim scrawled on the road. Despite a frantic missing persons database search among Reddit users, Steffi's true identity was never found. Some people think it's a long shot to link the recent incidents with Brooke James. She was 21 in 2009, meaning she would have been just 19 in 2007 when Kyla passed. The allegation spray painted on the pavement, however, was that she was involved in human trafficking and that she had murdered someone, and I want to make it clear that I'm not saying any of that is true. There's also confusion over what is meant by "check under my shed." Some people question the wording and believe it says "check under MK shed," so once again, there's much more digging to do. However, the connection between illicit substances and human trafficking is noteworthy. GHB, the substance involved in the overdose, is often used recreationally. However, it is also used similarly to Rohypnol. It is used by some very bad people to force others into situations against their will. It is used in human trafficking situations, but obviously these are just theories made by Redditors, and just to make it clear once again, I am not alleging anything. The Brooke James mentioned in the graffiti could well be someone else, or even a figment of the vandal's imagination. But there was yet another question that lingered in the air. Why did the dog specifically lead the person there? Some people have even suggested that Steffi was reincarnated into that dog, and that this was an attempt at some form of justice. Some users went as far as to think that the brother-in-law could be a serial killer, and the dog was just the unwilling accomplice, perhaps returning to the scene of a crime. Redditors are notoriously good at solving crimes and finding people, although sometimes they do find the wrong person. But at this point in time, the identity of Steffi remains a mystery.